Hey there, welcome to Tour the Office Tuesday. It's Tuesday, the 25th of July, year of our Lord, 2017. I have something to show you. It's this movie here. This is Space Jam. I keep it in my office. It's one of my favorite films from growing up. It's one that Jacqueline and I both share a great affinity for, and I bet you have your own nostalgic movie that you like to watch and reminisce on a different time and place when you watched it and loved it. This is one of my favorite movies because it was just mind-blowing to see some of my favorite Looney Tunes characters with my favorite athlete. It was amazing. So the reason that I'm talking about film, and particularly films that we like, is UKirk here at UT Knoxville has a new program that we're going to be implementing in the fall, and it's called Faith in Film. And we're not going to be showing Space Jam, unfortunately, but what we are going to be showing are going to be films that really push us to look for the presence of God, to look for Christ, to look for theological themes in places that we might not expect. So one of the really cool things about being a part of the Reformed tradition is that we don't have to, in our faith tradition, have to maybe shield ourselves from music and art and movies. We don't have to only watch, Kirk Cameron movies or only listen to certain radio stations, because we don't necessarily believe there to be a secular and sacred tension. What we hope to do in our faith tradition is to see Christ and see Christ's presence in the midst of everything, because as we understand the Bible, that's exactly where Christ was. He was in the midst of everything, in the midst of everyday issues, in the midst of things that others within his religious tradition, when he was doing ministry, would have deemed as inappropriate or beyond the scope of the barrier of what it means to be a part of God's community. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be kind of tuning our eyes and our hearts and our ears to look for the presence of God in other places. So we're going to be doing one film a month that get, in my opinion, progressively more difficult and challenging. And what we're going to hopefully do within the midst of this is tune our senses to look for God in very, very unexpected places. So we're going to start in September. And our first film is going to be one of my favorites, and I said it gets progressively more difficult. The first one is really a softball. It's The Iron Giant, and it's one of my favorite films from the 90s. It's an animated movie. It's a very, very theological movie, but it didn't, it's not one that you would go to Lifeway and find on the shelves, but it's a deeply theological movie. We're going to move on from there and watch some films that I don't think some of our students would watch in other areas of their life if we weren't gathered to do this sort of work. So we're going to be watching a Scandinavian film called Babette's Feast, which is just a tremendously beautiful film that deals with community and piety and what it means to be a person living out their faith in the world. We're going to watch one called The Seventh Seal. That's a movie from the 50s that deals with existential issues. We're going to even maybe we're going to look at a horror film called The Babadook, which is objectively speaking one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. But it's a film that deals with grief and how do we live in tension with grief and regret. And Dad flabbit. Well, take two. Take three. So something just fell behind me, and we're picking up right where we left off. We're talking about The Babadook, which is a horror movie, and you'll notice some of the films that we're talking about don't necessarily fall within an area of faith or explicitly Christian in nature. But the point of all this is to gather in community and to tune our senses to look for the theological in other places. So we're trying to look for Christ's presence in other places. I'm really excited about this. I think this is a pretty heady, pretty challenging endeavor that we're going to do. I love to do film study, And I think we've selected some really important films for our students to watch. If you want some of the lists of the films that we're going to be watching as a community, I'd be happy to give that to you. I've selected 6 total films that we're going to be watching throughout the year. I'll happily share those with you. But I'm very excited about this, and do be in prayer for us as we really try to help our students attune their senses to be theological people, looking at the world and looking for Christ's presence in the world, not separate from, because that's the Christ that we know is the one that works within the world that we labor in as well. I'll see you next week on Tree Office Tuesday.